Morning, guys. I'm excited to be here. I'm going to do something a little different this time than my usual sort of talks, and tell you about sort of the story about Hike and how we sort of went about building the company and the product. So in 2011, I moved back to India, which was home, back to New Delhi. And in New Delhi, there's a very sort of popular market in Connaught Place, where you have sort of this street full of street food vendors back to back. And they sort of look like this. And I still remember this day or this evening quite vividly because I had an iPhone 4 in my pocket at the time, connected to Edge. Because in India back then, we didn't have 3G. But it had been about 10 years since I was living on the internet. And what I had noticed that day was that in between these guys serving their orders, golgappas, chaats, and so on and so forth, there was one thing keeping them busy. It was this. It was the famous Nokia 1100 feature phone that truly brought India onto the telecom revolution. Now, this phone couldn't do much. It's a candy bar phone, had a green backlit to the screen, could make calls, barely SMSs, but it had a torch, and it was called the trucker phone. It was about 2,000 rupees, and it was very popular at the time. But I had an iPhone 4 in my pocket, and I was connected to the internet for the last 10 years, and it just struck me that most of these people have no clue of what the internet actually even is. And it just dawned upon me that there's 1 billion people in this country. They're going to come online for the first time in their lives on a mobile device. And what would that look like? How would these guys come on to the internet? And it took me back to my first time experience. I had a Packard Bell PC, 166 megahertz with a CD and a sort of floppy drive. Someone came and installed a dial-up modem in my house, gave me a CD and sort of allowed me to use Netscape. We remember Netscape. And the only thing back in the day was Yahoo. That was it. That's what we had. And this was and for most of you guys, the first time experience on the internet. But again, the big question was, what would be the experience for 1 billion people coming online for the first time in their lives onto the internet, mobile first? And the bet was that something cheap, because India's disposable income is very, very low, something cheap and something very easily understood would be the way India would come online. And the bet was that messaging would play a huge role in that sort of journey for these people. So it's been 3 years and approximately 10 months since we launched Hike, still a pretty young company. And in those 3 years and 10 months, we've managed to make a lot of progress. We've got over 100 million users, sending comfortably over 40 billion messages per month, and spending about 120 minutes per week in the application, making us the 4th most used app in India overall. And in this journey, people have been asking us, what did you guys do to make so much progress in such a competitive environment? And thinking through this question, it just made us realize one simple fact, but a pretty big thing, which is the only way to fail is to build things that people don't want. It's as simple as that. And clearly, we'd built enough things that people wanted for us to make so much progress in the last 3.5 to 4 years. And the big question was, how did we go about doing that? And that's the focus of my talk today. 3 or 4 years back, there are some events in my life that made me discover Zen Buddhism. And this has had a very profound impact on my life and the way I think about life and sort of building products and so on and so forth. And Zen Buddhism, for those of you who don't know, is a school of thought that emphasizes the value of meditation and, more importantly, sort of developing an intuition to understand the absolute truths in the world. And what I mean by absolute truths is, let's say the sun is out right now and it's bright outside. That's an absolute truth. It cannot be argued. But if I walk outside and say, guys, it's cold, and you say, no, this is typical London weather, that's what we call relative truths. Is it cold? Is it not cold? Is it both? Is it none? We'll never know. And through this sort of reflection and thinking about sort of the absolute truths in the world, what became very obvious was there's a lowest common denominator across every single country in the world. And the lowest common denominator is people. Everywhere you go, you have people that constitute companies, governments, countries. And to build something that people truly wanted, you had to have a very, very, very deep understanding of humanity and how people worked. So, thinking through that, what I realized was that there is one truth to human existence. And that is a sort of simple, neutral-seeking desire to make ourselves feel good about ourselves. That's it. We wake up in the morning to when we sleep at night. Every single thought or action that we do comes down to us making ourselves feel better about ourselves. And the reason I say neutral seeking is because this desire is met through multiple needs that are common in human nature. There are needs to do with myself, eating, physical activity, need for independence, honor, tranquility, sort of romance. Needs to do with things around me, curiosity, saving, sort of ordering of things. And more importantly, needs to do with other people. Family, social context, acceptance, and so on and so forth. And what became very apparent to me personally was that if you look at every single global company in the internet space, or actually in the traditional space too, they all solve best in class for one or more of these needs. So technically speaking, every company in this world is trying to solve for a need and trying to make you feel better about yourself, right? So it became obvious. If you built a product that solved for a need and did it really, really well, you'd make people sort of feel good about themselves, and the product would have a much bigger impact. And so this defined the foundation on how we do what we call product management at Hike. And so the question we asked was, okay, fine, what are the needs that Hike solves for? And we believe these 6, 7 needs are what Hike solves for because we're a messaging application or a social application, and social applications tend to solve for more needs than sort of just one. Now, every single human being on this planet has these needs. But the way you solve for these needs for a person depends on their environment. So to give you an example of how we solve for social contact in a market like India, India is a market of severe data constraints. 95% of people are on prepaid in a market like India. People buy data in sachets. Unlike the UK where you have contracts that have 2-3 GB a month given, in India people buy 150 MB for 7 days and they sort of buy them 2-3 times a month. At the same time, data is very expensive. So in a world of data constraints, how do you go and solve for simple messaging and social contact? And so we launched something called Hike Offline and Hike Direct, which let people communicate free of cost even without the internet. Hike Offline is a simple idea that we sort of built where if your data pack finishes, which is a very often thing that happens in India, you can still chat via Hike for free. And if you're in a 100-meter radius with a friend of yours, you can use Hike Direct to pair your phones together and transfer data back and forth. An idea of how we sort of solve for social contact in a market like India. And today on Hike Direct itself, people transfer over 4 terabytes of data every day on Hike Direct, which is incredible. Another way we solve for social contact was local keyboards, right? Because in India, we have a country of 20 countries and such a diverse set of people with so many languages, it just made a lot of sense to launch local keyboards, right? No, because most people do not understand input in local languages because there's no QWERTY standard in Hindi keyboards, Malayalam, Telugu, and so on and so forth. This pushed us to launch stickers on Hike. And we have some very, very funny, fun, exciting stickers that allow people to express themselves in over 40+ regional languages. Today on the platform, we have people exchanging over 300 million stickers per day. This is a huge scale. Another one is social structure. And I didn't have another icon, so I just used a heart here. But India is a land, is a country of a lot of social structure. And if you look at sort of a generation that grows up on the internet, they happen to be quantum leaps more liberal than a generation that does not. So you have a huge youth population in India that's very liberal, living with an older conservative population that's still very large. And with a lot of social structure in markets like India, there's not a lot of privacy the youth have to sort of be themselves and do what they want to do. On top of that, 50% of households in India, 50% of households have smartphones shared, which is incredible. So we launched something called hidden mode. And this is really cool. And hidden mode lets you hide certain contexts or chats in the applications. If someone grabs your phone, the chat's there, but it can't be seen unless you enter a passcode to unlock the chat. And we spent time with a lot of people in tier 2 and tier 3 towns where we understood that there is a need for acceptance to be solved for. And it's a very tricky one because there's a large fear of judgment, especially in sort of smaller towns where the population is far more conservative, so to sort of people to be themselves and communicate with the way they want to with people. And today we exchange over 40 billion messages per month on the platform, out of which over 40% happens through hidden mode. It's pretty incredible how Hike shows how the Indian youth live their lives. Now, the one that I'm excited about the most is that for 1 billion people first, the internet's very difficult to consume. Data is expensive. 10 MB doesn't make sense because 10 MB on Hike, YouTube, Facebook is fundamentally very different. And so we really believe the app model does not work. Why do you need one more app for one more thing? And we had this idea that apps are like CDs. And very quickly when the internet became pervasive on the desktop, CDs were no longer needed, and one more CD became one more tab in the browser. And we really believe that apps are like CDs. And one more app should become, simply speaking, one more contact in the address book. And so we did that. And a great example of this is news on Hike. And you can see news on top, just one more contact in the address book. I can tap on it, and voila, you have news on Hike. And today, people browse through 1.5 billion stories per month on Hike news, making us one of the biggest news applications as well in the country. And this also solves for the need for curiosity on what's going on sort of in your world. And if you were to put Hike together, what we realize is when we talk to people and say, why do you use Hike? They talk about how Hike lets them be themselves with their friends and do much more than simple messaging. And that tells us that sort of Hike as a whole solves for the need for independence. And this is very, very powerful in a mobile-only world where the only device you have is a mobile phone. Now, tech is very complicated. In most parts of the country, tech can be very intimidating because people have not seen this. And we just asked ourselves, saying, okay, fine, for a mobile-first market, if you were to simplify the internet through messaging and making one more app become one more contact in the address book, what more can we do? And can we wrap technology around people versus people trying to understand technology itself? So we discovered, this idea that if we understood people and their moods, we could sort of wrap technology around them. And to do that, you have to understand the environment around people. And an environment also has variables, time, location, weather, that have a huge impact on people's moods. So we discovered this idea called Kairos versus Chronos. This is two ways of describing time. Simply put, Chronos time is chronological time, 9 a.m., 10 a.m., 11 a.m., and so on and so forth. And Kairos time is a much more abstract way of defining time. So to give you an example, as I mentioned, this is what Chronos time looks like, how we sort of talk about time today. But Kairos time is, let's say it's 7 a.m. in the morning. Is that time for breakfast? Is that travel to work? What does 7 a.m. mean to you? And this is a very powerful thought because you could apply this to everything. And what this made us do in the app was tailor the app around you in a way, and I'll give you an example of the experience. So when you tap on, let's say, Happy Diwali, you get a sticker palette open up. And you can see, first of all these recommendations come based on the context of the conversation. But we said, what if we inputted sort of Kairos into this mix? How would the sticker palette change based on what you're doing right now and the environment around you? So what you'll see is, on the right-hand side, the left two stickers. We know it's 9 a.m. in the morning on a Monday. And based on that, we can really sort of wrap sort of the app around you and sort of make things a lot easier to use. And this idea can be applied across the board. And it's a very, very powerful thought. The last thing I want to talk about is there's a book called Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance that I came across about a year back. And it talks about classical and romantic value of products. And classical value, simply put, the features, the checklist of all the features you want in the application, but the romantic value of a feature is how does it make you feel? Because at the end of the day, as I talked about before, there's only one sort of neutral-seeking desire to human existence, which is to make ourselves feel good about ourselves. And the way we do this in the app is very interesting. So an example of romantic value in the app is how we introduced a feature called chat themes last year. When people woke up on Christmas morning and opened the app at about 9:30, 10 in the morning, you would see this in the application. You'd see snowfall and a gift pop down. And what you could do is you could open the gift, and there was a brand new feature in the application. For Valentine's Day, we had this new idea called nudge, and when you double tap the screen, a heart pops up and shakes the screen. Small, small, subtle things that make people feel really, really good about themselves. And this is what I wanted to talk about today, which is we really build things at the intersection of what we call liberal arts, product, and technology. And it's a very unusual approach to building things in the internet space, but we believe that's the only way in a market like India where you have so much diversity in a country. And I'd like to leave you with one quote that I discovered 3-4 years back, which is, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. But in the expert's mind, there are only a few. And it's a quote that's defined the way I think about life, the business, and so on and so forth. And with that, thanks a lot.